3 days before Thanksgiving, my mother called. "Megan," she said carefully, "this year, this place isn't for you. Chloe's bringing her new boyfriend, and I apparently didn't match the image. I was still holding the scarf I'd bought for Mom, hands dirty from the shop, heart already bruised. "I understand," I whispered. What they didn't know was this: the man they were trying to impress, he once worked for me. And what he revealed 5 days later didn't just change the dinner plans, it changed everything they thought they knew about me. 3 days before Thanksgiving, I got the call. I had just finished a 12-hour shift at the garage. My boots were still on, coat unzipped, grease under my fingernails, when the phone rang. It was Mum. "Megan," she started, her tone sugar-sweet but brittle underneath. "We need things to go smoothly this year. Chloe's bringing someone very important, and, well, this place isn't really for you right now." I didn't answer. My mind paused somewhere between confusion and the dull sting of recognition. "He's from a very polished background," she continued, like that explained everything. "Went to Stanford. His family's in real estate, very proper. You understand, right?" There it was. The word I'd heard since I was a teenager. Proper. A word that never included me, no matter how many things I fixed or hours I worked or how quietly I existed. She added, "Chloe just wants everything to go perfectly." I glanced down at the scarf in my bag, the one I had woven from local wool, something warm and soft I thought she'd like. Next to it was a watch I'd had engraved for Dad. "Thanks for teaching me to fix what matters." I'd rearranged my entire work week just to be on time. "I understand," I said, and I hung up. I stood in the entryway of my small house, not moving. Snow was beginning to fall outside. It was quiet, so quiet it hurt. I walked into the kitchen and placed the unopened gifts on the table. I didn't cry, I didn't curse, I just stood there letting the weight of absence settle on me like the snow on my truck's hood. Thanksgiving morning came and went. No calls, no texts, just silence. I made 2 eggs and toast, didn't even warm the pie I'd bought on a whim. Around noon, I put on my jacket and drove to Mrs. Halpern's house. Her garage door was jammed again. She greeted me like I was family. "You working on a holiday?" she asked gently. I shrugged. "Better than sitting alone." She smiled and said, "Coffee's on the table." Fixing her garage door didn't take long, just a loose wire in the opener and a misaligned sensor. I stayed a bit longer though, carried in firewood, changed the batteries in her smoke alarm. She told me stories about her late husband, how he used to burn the turkey every single year but insisted it added character. I laughed for the first time that day. Before I left, she handed me a slice of pumpkin pie wrapped in foil. "In case you forget how good home can still taste," she said. That sentence hit me harder than I let on. I nodded, said thank you, and drove off slowly, pie resting on the passenger seat like some fragile truth. As I passed my parents' street, I saw the lights glowing warmly through the windows. People's silhouettes moved behind the curtains, laughing, talking, raising wine glasses. The golden halo of a holiday I was once part of. But I didn't stop. Back home, I lit the fire in the small wood stove, curled up in my old recliner, and stared at the pie. No whipped cream, no crowd, no forced smiles. But it was warm, and it was mine. Strangely, I didn't feel lonely. I felt something else. Not peace, not yet, but a flicker of clarity. All these years I'd kept showing up. Mother's Day, birthdays, emergencies, I'd shown up with flowers, tools, solutions, and still I was easy to erase. One polished boyfriend, and suddenly I didn't fit. I thought about the times Chloe needed help, and I wired her money with no questions asked. Or the time Dad's mower died 2 hours before a neighbourhood contest, and I dropped everything to fix it. None of it mattered now. Because I didn't wear heels or have a LinkedIn page with a shiny headshot. They saw grease on my hands and assumed that was all there was. But that pie from Mrs. Halpern reminded me, sometimes love shows up wrapped in foil, not fanfare. I stared into the flames and made a quiet promise to myself. No more shrinking to fit.
No more trying to be what they needed just to feel like I belonged. If they couldn't see me, maybe it was time I stopped waiting for their invitation. Later that night, I cleaned up the kitchen, placing the scarf and the watch back into the closet, still wrapped. Maybe I'd give them next year, maybe never, I wasn't sure.
I stood by the window for a long time, watching as the snow thickened into a quiet blanket across the lawn, rooftops, and empty street. The world felt paused, like even time was reluctant to move forward. That's when the thought crept in, maybe I was always meant to be on the sidelines. The spare tire, the tool only used when something breaks, then pushed back into the drawer. I shook it off, poured myself a mug of tea, and sat back down near the fire. But I couldn't stop the memories. 8th grade spelling bee. Mom stayed home to curl Chloe's hair for a school recital. Junior year science fair. I won 2nd place statewide. They didn't come because Chloe had her dance showcase. Every milestone of mine was exchanged for a shinier one of hers. Still, I never complained. I figured that's what family did. You supported each other, quietly. But it's different when the quiet becomes absence. When your presence is not just overlooked, but unwelcome.
The worst part wasn't that they didn't want me there. It was that they didn't even think twice about it. My mother's voice had been calm, almost clinical. You understand, right? Like I wasn't their daughter, just some old fixture in a house they were redecorating. I thought about texting Dad, just to see if he'd say something different, if maybe, just maybe, he'd been against the decision. But I didn't. I'd learned that silence from him usually meant agreement. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet I hadn't touched in weeks, my investment portfolio. The numbers flickered on the screen, solid and certain. Over $1 million now, all built quietly, year by year, wrench by wrench. They didn't know about it. Nobody did. And maybe that was the point. This was mine. Not for show. Not for approval. Just mine. As I leaned back and looked at the firelight dancing on the window pane, a thought settled in deep and unmoving. They may have erased me from the table, but I had built one of my own, and someday someone would see it. Growing up in the Blake household was like living in a showroom, everything polished, colour-coordinated, and quietly competitive. My mother, Linda, had this obsession with presentation. Every towel was folded just so, every family photo meticulously staged, even our lemonade had matching straws. And Chloe was the crown jewel. She had perfect posture by age 6, a gleaming pageant smile by 7. By 10, she was on stage, tap dancing, giving speeches, playing the precocious daughter in community theatre. People called her gifted, poised, golden, and my parents soaked in every syllable like sunshine. Me, I liked taking things apart, radios, toasters. One time I rebuilt Dad's old lawnmower just to see if I could. I remember walking into the kitchen, hands black with grease, and proudly announcing it ran smoother than ever. Mum looked up from curling Chloe's hair and said, "You couldn't at least wash your hands before coming in here?" It was always like that. When Chloe had her first big recital, the whole family dressed up like we were attending the Grammys. When I made the regional robotics team in high school, Mum said, "That's great, but are they serving dinner afterward? It's a long drive." By senior year, I stopped telling them things. I won a local scholarship for women in STEM and didn't even mention it at dinner. Chloe was dating the captain of the debate team and needed the spotlight. They never said I wasn't good enough, not directly. But it was in the way they clapped politely instead of cheering. In the way Dad looked confused every time I brought up engines or circuits. In the way Mum pursed her lips whenever I showed up in work boots. Respectable, that was her favourite word. "Why not go into architecture instead?" she asked once. Or something more presentable. I learned early that their love came with subtitles. You're smart, but you're capable, but you're our daughter. But Chloe never had to earn her place. I had to fight for a corner. And even then they still called it a phase, a rebellion, something I'd grow out of like acne or messy handwriting. But I didn't grow out of it. I grew into it. I built a life from it. And every time they ignored it, diminished it, I told myself, they just don't get it. What I didn't realize back then was that they chose not to. They saw me. They just didn't want me. I used to think maybe college would be the turning point. Maybe if I left town, got my certification, proved I could make something of myself, they'd finally see me differently. I enrolled in a trade school 2 hours away. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I worked nights at a diner to cover rent and bought second-hand textbooks with grease on the covers and wisdom inside. I graduated at the top of my class. I called Mom the day I passed my Master Diesel Tech certification. "Oh, that's nice," she said, then quickly pivoted. "Did I tell you Chloe's co-hosting a local morning show now? Isn't that something?" That night, I sat in my studio apartment, eating cold pasta and listening to her voice replay in my head. That's nice. Like I'd just told her, I got a free coffee, not a professional milestone. It only got worse when I started working at the depot. Long hours, cold bays, clients who underestimated me until I proved otherwise. I came home exhausted, sore, and quietly proud. But that pride never made it to my family's dinner table. At Dad's birthday that year, I brought a gift, a custom wrench set with his initials engraved. He nodded politely and went back to unwrapping a leather briefcase from Chloe. "This is perfect," he said, holding it up like a trophy. I was invisible in plain sight. Even my clothes became a point of division. Chloe wore silk blouses and ankle boots. I wore denim and steel toes. Once, during a family brunch, Mum pulled me aside and whispered, "Couldn't you have dressed up a little more, just for today?" I looked down at my clean, button-up shirt and felt like a stranger in my own skin. Respectability. That word again. I started to wonder what they thought I was even aiming for. Did they believe I'd just drift through life elbow deep in carburetors and solitude? What they didn't know, what I never told them, was that I had a plan. Every spare dollar I didn't spend on rent or food went into investments. I read finance books during my breaks, listened to podcasts on compound interest while I rotated tires. I was building something, even if they couldn't see it, even if they didn't want to. Their silence didn't stop me. It just trained me to keep my success quiet. Because deep down I knew the truth. They didn't want a version of me they couldn't pity. They didn't want me to win unless they could call it a fluke, an accident, a surprise. But what I was building, it wasn't an accident. It was an empire. It started small, a few $100s in an index fund, then a side hustle fixing up an old Ford truck I flipped for twice what I paid. Bit by bit, wrench by wrench, dollar by dollar, I stacked bricks no one ever saw. At 28, I bought a house. It was falling apart. Warped floors, pipes that moaned in protest, a furnace older than me. But I fixed it. Every bolt, every tile, every inch. I built sweat into equity and equity into power. Still, I said nothing. Not when Chloe's apartment flooded and she borrowed money without ever really asking. Not when Mom needed her dryer replaced and I paid the technician myself before she even noticed it was broken. Not when Dad's back went out and I spent 3 weekends landscaping for him while he sat on the porch, sipping lemonade and offering tips. Each time I hoped, maybe this time they'd see me differently. Maybe this time they'd say, "Thank you, we're proud." But gratitude was a language they never learned to speak with me, and so I stayed silent. It wasn't shame, it was armor. Because I realized something. If they knew, really knew, how far I'd come, they'd try to take credit. They'd rewrite the story with themselves in it, as inspiration, as support, as guiding hands. And they weren't. They were the lesson, the cautionary tale, the blueprint for everything I refused to become. So I let them keep their illusion. Let Chloe be the face of the family. Let them boast about her job offers and filtered Instagram life. All while I quietly crossed milestones they never even imagined for me. debt-free by 32, six-figure investment account by 35, business ownership at 40, and just last year, that seven-figure net worth marker, a number I never chased for pride, only for proof. Proof that I was never the disappointment they painted me as, that I wasn't the other daughter, the awkward one, the mechanic girl. I was Megan Blake. And while they posed for family photos and holiday cards, I built a future they could never touch. But still, a part of me waited for the moment they'd see, not just the money or the titles, but the woman who'd risen quietly through their neglect. I told myself I didn't need it, that I'd outgrown the ache. But every time I heard Chloe's name toasted at a birthday or saw Mom's eyes light up at one of her job promotions, I felt that old wound twitch. Not because I wanted their praise, but because I'd earned it. And they never even looked up. 5 days after Thanksgiving, I was under a flatbed truck, hands deep in grease, when I heard the sound of tires crunching gravel in my driveway. I wiped my hands on a rag, stepped out, and froze. There they were, Mom, Dad, and Chloe, standing in the cold December air like ghosts, summoned by guilt. Mom clutched a tin of cranberry muffins. Dad rocked on his heels. Chloe looked like she was ready to explode. "Megan," Mom called out, her voice laced with artificial cheer. "We thought we'd check in on you." I leaned against the garage door frame, crossing my arms. "After you told me Thanksgiving wasn't for me?" Chloe stepped forward, eyes blazing. "You should have told me," she snapped. "Told you what?" I asked, confused. "That Evan worked for you, that you trained him, that you saved his job when he nearly wrecked a client's axle." The name hit me like a wrench to the ribs. Evan, her boyfriend, the one I'd been deemed unfit to meet. The same kid I'd taken a chance on at the shop years ago. I didn't even know it was him. "I didn't make that connection," I muttered. "Well, he did," Chloe said, arms crossed. "He told us everything about how you mentored him, about how you taught him to invest, about the spreadsheets, about the $1 million. Silence fell like a hammer. Mum's face had gone pale. Dad looked down at his shoes. "He said he wouldn't have a career without you," Chloe added, her voice quivering. "And here I was, thinking you were beneath all of this." I said nothing. Just watched their world rearrange itself in real time. Then Mom stepped forward, voice shaky. "We had no idea, honey." "Would it have mattered if you did?" I asked. "Would I have been welcome then?" They didn't answer. Dad cleared his throat. "It's not about the money, Megan." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Of course not." Chloe's face was burning now. "You embarrassed me. You made me look stupid." I straightened. "I didn't make you do anything. You chose to be ashamed of me." Then Mom said it. "Evan's starting a business, something with auto parts. He thinks you two should work together, combine your strengths." And there it was. Not remorse, not reconciliation, opportunity. They hadn't come for me. They'd come for what I'd built. I stood in the chill, wind biting my ears, and stared at them. My family. For a moment, I felt like I was back in high school again, holding up a science trophy no one clapped for. "You came to apologize," I said slowly, "but you brought a pitch." Chloe stepped forward again, jaw tight. "It's not a pitch. It's called building something. Isn't that what you've been doing all these years?" "I've been building me," I replied, "not some corporate dream you just figured out how to cash in on." She blinked like she'd been slapped. "So what? You're just going to walk away from this? From us?" I glanced at the muffins in Mom's hands, still warm. A peace offering, maybe. Or maybe just a prop. "You walked away from me a long time ago," I said. This visit, it's not repair, it's strategy." Dad finally spoke. "That's not fair, Megan." "Fair?" I laughed, not kindly. "Was it fair when you asked me not to come to Thanksgiving? When you decided I wasn't good enough to be around Chloe's boyfriend, not knowing he once mopped my shop floor?" Chloe's face turned a shade paler. "You should have told me." No, I said. You should have cared enough to ask. The silence that followed was thick, sour, heavy with years of unspoken truths. Mum tried again. Megan, sweetheart, we didn't know how much you'd grown. We're proud of you. Truly. Proud? I echoed. Now that you know the numbers, now that Evan vouched for me. She flinched. That's the thing, I said, voice quiet but solid. I never needed a cheerleader. I needed a mother. Her lip quivered. I'm trying to be that now. I looked her in the eyes, steady. Then don't start with muffins and business ideas. Start with honesty. No one moved. I let the pause hang there, let it choke out the last bit of performance they had left in them. I'm not angry, I added, just done. I turned and walked back into my garage, the echo of the door slamming behind me like punctuation at the end of a chapter I never asked to write. They stood there for a moment longer, unsure of whether to follow or flee, but I already knew their decision. Some doors close louder than others. That night I couldn't sleep. I tried. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the tick of the wall clock and the occasional creak of the house settling around me. But my thoughts wouldn't stop racing, not because I regretted what I said, but because I knew what came next. The distance, the retreat, the return to silence. I got up, poured myself a glass of water, and sat by the window. Snow had started again. Light, almost invisible flakes. It was the kind of quiet snowfall that made the world feel paused, like even the sky needed time to think. My phone buzzed just after 10 a.m. the next morning. Chloe. I stared at her name for a moment, thumb hovering over the screen. I almost let it ring out, but curiosity won. Hey, she said when I picked up. Her voice was smaller now, not defensive, not angry, just tired. Look, she started, yesterday was a mess, but I want to start over. I didn't say anything. I talked to Evan, she continued, and he really thinks the business idea could work, with you on board. He respects you, Megan. He told me everything, about how you taught him about investing, about your spreadsheet, about your patience. I stayed quiet. I know we've never been close, she said, but maybe this is a chance to change that, to build something as sisters. I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly. Chloe, I said, voice even. Do you even know what I do every day? She hesitated. You fix trucks? I diagnose electrical failures in engines built for hauling 30 tons of steel. I recalibrate emission systems that keep our highways legal. I lead a team. I manage logistics. I negotiate contracts. And yes, sometimes I still crawl under rigs when I have to. Silence. I've built something, I said. Not just a bank account, a life, a business, a reputation. I know, she whispered. That's why I'm calling. But if I'd said yes yesterday, before you knew about Evan, before you knew about the money, would I have been welcome at Thanksgiving? Her breath caught. No, she admitted. I was embarrassed. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. And now? More silence. I'm not interested in buying my way into acceptance, I said. If you want to rebuild something real with me, it won't start with a business deal. Megan, she began. This isn't pride, I said firmly. It's boundaries. Then I ended the call. And for the first time in a very long while, I didn't feel hollow. I felt whole. 2 days passed before I saw them again. It was early afternoon when the crunch of tyres on fresh snow made me glance up from the workbench. I peeked through the curtain and saw their car, Mum and Dad, stepping out slowly, bundled in their coats like they were preparing for battle. I opened the door before they could knock. They looked startled. Hi, sweetheart, Mum said softly. Can we come in? I hesitated. Not because I was still angry, but because I needed to make sure I wasn't about to reopen something I'd already closed. I stepped aside. Sure, I said. But I need you to understand this isn't a reset, it's a reckoning. We sat in the living room, the same one they hadn't visited in years. The scarf I bought for her still sat unopened on the table. She glanced at it but said nothing. Dad looked uncomfortable, like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mum cleared her throat. "We made a mistake, Megan. A big one." I nodded. "Yeah, you did." Dad leaned forward. "We were wrong to exclude you. We didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't mean to?" I asked, meeting his eyes. "You told me Thanksgiving wasn't for me. You didn't think I'd push back." They went quiet. "I want to be clear," I continued, calm and firm. "I'm not here to argue. I'm not here to be convinced. I'm here to finish something." Mom shifted in her seat. "We're not here for money, I swear." "Then why now?" I asked. "Why only after you found out what I've built?" Dad opened his mouth, closed it again. "If Evan hadn't said a word," I said, "would you be sitting here right now?" Silence. I took a deep breath. "I'm not ashamed of what I do. I never have been. The only thing I regret is letting your silence shrink me for so long." Mum's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "We were trying to protect Chloe's moment. We didn't mean to erase yours." "But you did," I replied, "and I've spent years giving, forgiving, and waiting to be enough for you." I looked between them. This is where that ends. They both froze. Mom's mouth parted like she had something to say, but the words didn't come. Dad looked at the floor, jaw clenched, nostrils flaring like he was bracing for impact. But there was no anger left in me, no more begging, no more bargaining, just boundaries. "I'm not cutting you off," I said calmly, "but I'm done chasing validation. I'm done performing for love. I'm done contorting myself into someone you can tolerate at the table." Dad lifted his head. "So, what happens now?" I stood, walked slowly to the front door, and opened it wide. Cold air swept in, brushing against the back of my legs like a whisper. "What happens now," I said, "is that you decide whether you can love me for who I am, not who you imagined I'd become, but you do it from the other side of this door." Mum stood, clutching her purse with trembling fingers. She looked at the gift bag on the table again. I could see her mind flicker. She wanted to reach for it, maybe offer it back, maybe ask about it, but she didn't, and I didn't fill the silence for her, not this time. Dad followed her lead, rising slowly, his shoulders stooped. We'll give you space." I nodded once. They stepped outside. I watched them walk across the yard, footprints pressed deep into the snow. Before they got into the car, Mum turned back. Our eyes met, and for a moment I thought she might say something, apologize, beg, reach. But she didn't. She just stood there, swallowed by her silence, and finally got into the car. I closed the door gently, not out of anger, out of clarity, and then I locked it. Not because I was afraid they'd come back too soon, but because I wasn't ready to reopen wounds that were just beginning to scab. I leaned my back against the door, exhaled deeply, and looked around at the house I'd built. My house, my walls, my rules. And for the first time they felt like more than bricks and beams. They felt like mine. The hours after they left passed quietly. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't replay every sentence like I used to, wondering what I should have said differently. I simply existed, fully, in my own space, in my own peace. That night I made dinner for one, grilled cheese and tomato soup, simple, warm, mine. The tin of cranberry muffins still sat on the counter untouched. I didn't throw them out, but I didn't eat them either. They felt like a symbol, too stale to be sweet, too late to be welcome. I lit the fireplace and curled up in my worn chair, a blanket over my knees and a journal in my lap. For the first time in months, I wrote without hesitation, not for a bank ledger, not for a spreadsheet, just for me. I wrote about how it felt to finally say no, to finally close a door and not feel like the villain in the story, to stop editing myself for the comfort of people who never bothered to read past the first page. The next morning I woke up before sunrise and stood in the backyard with a mug of black coffee. The air was crisp, the kind that stings a little when you breathe too deeply. I liked it. It reminded me I was still here, still standing. I looked out at the line of young apple trees I planted last spring. Their branches were bare now, but strong, resilient, waiting quietly for the right season to bloom, just like me. And then something inside me shifted. Not a dramatic thunderclap or epiphany, just a soft, certain click. I no longer needed to be let in because I wasn't locked out anymore. I had simply walked away. And that, I realized, was the most powerful choice I'd ever made. It started with a single email. Subject line: saw your name on a community forum, wanted to ask about investing. It was from a young woman named Marisol, a former trade school student, newly certified, trying to navigate how to stretch her first paycheck. She'd heard through someone at the local garage that I knew my way around the stock market. I almost ignored it. But something tugged at me, not obligation, not pride, just possibility. I wrote her back that night. That message turned into a Zoom call. That Zoom call turned into 2 more, then 4. Before I knew it, I was hosting informal weekend sessions at the community centre, answering questions about credit, compound interest, index funds, how to get out of debt without shame. They kept showing up: mechanics, cleaners, line cooks, single mums, women with cracked nails and tired eyes who reminded me of the girl I used to be. They didn't speak in boardroom lingo, but they listened, they asked, they learned, and for the first time I stopped hiding what I knew. I printed out worksheets I used myself, showed them how to automate their savings, talked about dividend reinvestment and long-term goals. I told them what no one had told me at 22, that wealth isn't just for the polished and privileged, it's for the persistent. After one workshop, a woman with calloused hands and a navy jumpsuit slipped a note under my windshield wiper. It was written in blocky, nervous handwriting: "Thanks for showing me that worth isn't something you prove, it's something you carry." I sat in my truck, fingers frozen around that note, heart thudding like I'd just won something important. Not a trophy, not $1 million account, but something far more sacred: respect, recognition, relief. I hadn't just built financial freedom, I'd built a mirror. And finally, people were seeing themselves in it. Jada was the first person who really saw it happening. She showed up one Saturday morning with her usual box of donuts and 2 giant travel mugs of gas station coffee. I was in the middle of printing off session outlines at the centre when she walked in, raised an eyebrow and said, "Okay, financial guru, when were you going to tell me you had a whole fan club?" I laughed and shook my head. It's not a fan club. It's just people who've been ignored long enough, finally realising they don't have to stay broke or silent. Jada plopped down beside me, grabbed a powdered donut and took a bite. "No offence," she said with a mouthful, "but this is cooler than anything Chloe ever posted." I rolled my eyes, but I smiled. She always knew how to keep it grounded. After the session ended, we sat on the hood of her beat-up Jeep, legs swinging, watching a few of the women laugh and exchange phone numbers as they headed to their cars. The snow was melting slowly, puddles forming in the cracks of the pavement, soft rays of winter sun beginning to peek through the clouds. "You ever think," Jada said, nudging my arm, "that maybe this is what you were supposed to be building all along?" I didn't answer right away, because she was right. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't even just about proving something to my family. It was about taking all the pieces of myself that had been dismissed, my grit, my curiosity, my discipline, and turning them into tools for someone else. It was about showing people like me that there's more than one kind of success, that you can build wealth with motor oil on your hands and a wrench in your back pocket, that you can be messy and still be brilliant, that you don't have to speak Wall Street to own your future. And in that moment, as I watched a teenage girl in steel-toed boots wave goodbye with a workbook clutched to her chest, I felt it. Not just pride, legacy. That evening, back home, I stood in the middle of my garage, surrounded by half-sorted tools and the faint hum of the space heater. I looked around at everything I'd built, quietly, brick by brick. The old workbench I refinished myself, the rusted vise I bought for $10 at a flea market, the pegboard wall lined with wrenches, each one a small memory of sweat, failure, and eventual triumph. I wasn't flashy, I never had been, but I was solid. I reached for the envelope Jada had slipped into my coat pocket earlier that day. "From the centre," she'd said, winking. "Just open it later." Inside was a hand-drawn thank you card. No names, just a sketch of a woman in overalls holding a wrench like a sword. Underneath, in blocky, careful letters, "You showed me what strong really looks like." I pressed the card to my chest and breathed. It wasn't the kind of recognition that came with applause. It was better. It was real. Later that night, while flipping through old notebooks, I found the original budget sheet I'd created at 23. I smiled at the tiny, shaky numbers. $300 here, $75 there. The dreams scribbled in margins like, "Someday own a home," or "Maybe start a garage of my own." I had checked every box, but the biggest thing I'd built wasn't on paper. It was the version of me I'd finally become, unapologetic, steady, and no longer asking for a seat at a table that never wanted me. I was building something far stronger now, something that didn't need permission. And as I looked around the quiet garage, I whispered a simple truth into the air like a promise. I am enough. The first letter came in March, a pale cream envelope with my name written in my mother's unmistakable cursive. It had weight to it, emotional and literal, like she thought thicker paper might hold more meaning. Inside was a card with pastel flowers and golden embossed text. "You are always welcome home." No note, no apology, just those 6 words and a return address. I stared at it for a long time, not angry, not sad, just unmoved. Because it wasn't the kind of welcome that came with understanding. It was the kind that came when the cost of exclusion grew too high. 2 weeks later, a text from Chloe lit up my screen. "Heard about the workshop." "That's amazing, I mean it. I know things between us are weird, but would you want to grab coffee sometime, just talk?" I stared at the message, thumb hovering. There was a time I would have jumped at the chance. A time when I would have told myself, this is it, the moment we start over. But now I didn't need a reunion to validate my healing, because I wasn't waiting for someone else to name my worth anymore. Still, I typed out a reply. "Thanks, I'm proud of it. Hope you're doing well too." Short, kind, enough. I didn't ask for coffee, I didn't reach for more, I didn't need to. That's what no one had told me about healing. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't come with violins or perfect endings. It came in the quiet refusal to go backward, in the soft power of no thank you. By summer, I'd stopped waiting for their names to pop up on my phone, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. I was no longer orbiting their approval. I was anchored in my own life now, and it felt solid beneath my feet. The workshops had grown. What started as a few Saturday gatherings turned into a monthly series with its own sign-up list. We had binders, spreadsheets, and even a basic website. Word spread quietly, like fire through dry grass, steady and undeniable. One morning, a local reporter emailed asking to interview me for a segment on women in trades and financial independence. I almost declined. I didn't care about the spotlight. But then I thought about the girl I used to be, the one hiding her bank statements, folding grease-streaked sleeves to appear smaller. And I thought maybe it's not about me, maybe it's about who sees it. So I said yes. The segment aired on a Thursday, 5 minutes of footage showing the garage, the workshops, a brief clip of me explaining dollar cost averaging with a carburetor as a prop. My inbox exploded, not with brands or sponsors, but with people, real ones. A woman in Kansas who just opened a Roth IRA after 15 years of living paycheck to paycheck. A former waitress from Pittsburgh who started her own mobile mechanic service after saving her tips for tools. And one message from Evan. Saw the story. Damn proud of you. I smiled at that one, not because I needed his pride, but because it reminded me that recognition doesn't always come from the places we expect. Sometimes it comes from someone who once stood in your shadow and decided to grow instead of compete. That evening, I walked through the apple trees in my backyard, now lush with green. They were blooming. And I thought, so am I. One evening, Jada pulled into my driveway just as the sky turned lavender. She hopped out of her Jeep, 2 coffees in hand, and a familiar grin on her face. "You working or hiding?" she teased, nodding at the tools still laid out across the porch. "Always working," I smirked, brushing sawdust off my sleeves. We sat on the porch steps, sipping quietly. The neighborhood was peaceful. Kids' laughter in the distance, the smell of someone grilling down the block, fireflies beginning their nightly dance. "You ever think about going back?" she asked gently. I didn't have to ask what she meant. To them, to the house, to the version of me that still believed it could be different. "No," I said simply. "Not unless they see me without the $1 million, she nodded. "They probably won't. I know." We sat in silence for a while, a comfortable one. "You know what?" I said, turning to her. "I finally feel like I'm not trying to fix the wrong engine anymore." Jada chuckled, tossing a donut hole in my direction. "That's the most mechanic thing I've ever heard anyone say." But she wasn't wrong. I wasn't fixing them anymore. I was building me. Not the version my family wished they could parade around. Not the one edited for holiday dinners or polished for appearances. The kind of woman who chose integrity over invitation. Who didn't ask to belong because she already did, to herself. As the stars began to blink into the sky, I whispered something I hadn't dared say aloud until that moment. I'm not a loser. And this time, I didn't need anyone to tell me otherwise. Fall crept in quietly that year, painting the edges of my backyard in rust and gold. The apple trees were heavy with fruit, more than I expected. I spent a whole afternoon harvesting, sticky with sap and laughter as Jada helped, shouting things like, "You could start a cider empire." We loaded the extras into brown paper bags and dropped them off around the neighborhood. The older couple on the corner, the new family across the street. Even Mrs. Delgado, who once yelled at me for revving my engine too loud. She accepted the apples with a tight smile and a quiet, "Thank you." Progress. Back home, I baked a pie. Not the bourbon pecan one I used to dream about making for Thanksgiving. This one was simple. Apples, cinnamon, flaky crust from scratch. I ate a slice still warm, the rest cooling on the window ledge. And then something strange happened. I didn't feel sad. Not a trace of the usual ache that came with the holidays approaching. No hollow echo of absence. No tightness in my chest when I passed by the house I once hoped to be invited back into. Because this, my home, my hands, my harvest, was enough. The table may have been smaller, the laughter quieter, the memories less polished, but they were mine. That night, I wrapped the last slice of pie and set it in the fridge. Not for someone else, not for company, just for me. A quiet promise, a private reward. And as I turned off the kitchen lights, I glanced once at the old scarf still folded in its gift bag. Then finally I tucked it into the drawer, not as a wound, but as a story, a beginning. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail, handwritten, unpretentious, not from my parents. Not from Chloe, from Marisol, the trade school student I'd helped months ago. It was folded neatly into thirds, the paper slightly wrinkled, as if it had travelled with her for days before she found the courage to send it. The handwriting was careful, each word etched with intention. Ms. Megan, it began. I paid off my credit card this month. I know that doesn't sound like much, but to me, it's everything. I wanted you to know that your voice in that workshop stayed with me every time I wanted to give up, every time I thought I was too late, too messy, too stuck. There was more. A few lines about her new job at a garage, how she'd started helping her co-workers set up retirement accounts. A joke about how she now had a budget binder with pink tabs and glitter pens. I read the letter twice, then 3 more times, and by the end I was crying, not because I was sad, but because I was seen, truly seen. Not through a lens of expectations or disappointment, not filtered by titles or family roles, but for who I was, who I had chosen to become. And somehow that quiet recognition from a stranger felt more healing than 1,000 apologies ever could. Later that day, I tacked Marisol's letter beside the sketch from the workshop. A new wall was forming above my workbench, not of trophies or diplomas, but of truth. Reminders that legacy isn't built through perfection. It's built through presence, through choosing to stay when it's hard, to stand when you're overlooked, to believe when no one else does. That night under a sky thick with stars, I whispered into the dark. I didn't fix the family I was born into, but I did build the one I needed. And that, I realized, was the best kind of ending. One I didn't have to repair. The first snow of winter came early that year. I stood by the window of my small living room, a cup of black coffee in hand, watching as the flakes blanketed the backyard. The apple trees stood bare now, their branches etched like quiet poems against the sky. There was peace in the stillness, not the kind I used to chase with noise and accomplishment, but a peace that came from knowing, truly knowing, that I didn't need to earn my place in the world anymore. I already had it. Outside, my neighbours were stringing up lights. Across the street, kids were laughing, building lopsided snowmen. I smiled at the crooked scarves, the 2 big hats. Imperfect, but beautiful. Like life. Like healing. I turned back toward the fireplace, where Jada had just finished arranging 2 mismatched stockings we'd found at a thrift store. "One for me, one for you," she grinned, "and one for the next big dream." I raised an eyebrow. 3 stockings for 2 people? She winked. You never know. We sat on the couch, knees curled under old blankets, sipping cider and watching the fire crackle. There was no grand party, no big reveal, just warmth, connection, presence, and that was enough. Later that evening, I opened my journal to a fresh page and wrote a single sentence. I don't need to be invited anymore. Because I'd stopped waiting for someone else to give me permission to feel whole. Because I had built a life where I belonged, without conditions, without edits, without apology. Because sometimes the most powerful love story is the one where you finally choose yourself. As the fire settled into soft embers, I whispered one last thing into the quiet of my home. I'm proud of you, Megan. And for once, I didn't need anyone to say it back.